He had everything: power, money, fame, but not a heart that could feel. Until one freezing Christmas Eve, a little girl whispered, "Please don't leave me, sir," and shattered the walls around his soul. What he didn't know was that the dying child he saved under the streetlight was his own daughter from the woman he once broke. Now haunted by regret and racing against fate, a millionaire learns that redemption doesn't come from wealth, but from the fragile heartbeat of the child who calls him Daddy. Hey everyone, before we dive into today's heart-touching story, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? And if you're new here, please join our family by hitting that subscribe button and turning on the bell so you never miss an emotional story like this one. All right, let's begin. Under the vast silver veil of December snow, New York lay almost breathless, its streets softened by the hush of winter. The world glittered under pale streetlights, and the flakes fell like fragments of lost memories. Ethan Cole, a man the media worshipped as the empire builder of coal industries, walked through the silence with a heart as empty as the frozen park around him. His shoes crunched against the icy path, every step echoing a loneliness he never admitted to anyone. His royal blue cashmere coat shimmered faintly under the light, the same color as the suit he had worn to a charity gala earlier that evening, a night filled with smiles that never reached his eyes. He had left the crowd of polished lies and laughter to breathe, but even in solitude he couldn't escape the ache that lived in his chest. The air stung his face, sharp and pure, as if punishing him for every life he'd ignored while climbing toward the top. His assistant had begged him to take a car, but Ethan preferred the cold. It felt honest. He passed the flickering lamps, the whispering wind, and the rows of benches coated in white, until suddenly the sound that wasn't snow stopped him. A faint cry, fragile, broken, almost swallowed by the storm. He froze, scanning the darkness. "Please, don't leave me, sir." The words slipped through the night like a prayer from heaven's edge. His pulse quickened. His eyes darted toward the voice. There, beneath a flickering street light, on a bench half buried in snow, he saw her, a small figure curled up like a forgotten doll. The pink jacket she wore was ripped at the shoulder, its color faded to the soft gray of despair. Snowflakes clung to her lashes. Her tiny hands were stiff and pale. Ethan felt something inside him fracture. He rushed forward, his breath visible in the icy air, dropping to his knees before her. Hey, sweetheart, can you hear me?" His voice trembled despite years of commanding boardrooms. The girl's lips quivered, her eyes half open, dull from exhaustion. He could see her struggling to breathe, each inhale shallow and trembling. Without thinking, he stripped off his coat and wrapped it around her frail frame, the royal blue fabric swallowing her like a wave of warmth against the deadly chill. Her head rested against his chest. Her small body was so light it barely felt real. "It's okay. I've got you," he murmured, as though words could thaw her fear. Snow kept falling, coating his hair, settling on his shoulders, but he didn't move. The world around him disappeared. The cars, the city, the money. All that remained was the fragile heartbeat against his chest. She tried to speak again, her voice cracking like ice breaking on a river. "It hurts. When I breathe." He looked at her, helpless, his throat tight. "Stay with me, okay? I'm calling for help." His trembling fingers fumbled for his phone, but the girl clutched his sleeve weakly, her eyes pleading. "Please, don't leave me, sir." The sound shattered him. For reasons he couldn't explain, those words hit deeper than any loss he'd known. Memories flickered. His mother's death when he was 12, the night his fiancée walked away calling him heartless, the countless people he'd stepped over to reach the top. This tiny dying child was calling him sir, as if he were worth trusting. His eyes burned, and he pressed her closer. "I'm right here. I'm not leaving you." She coughed softly, her small hand brushing against his chest as if searching for warmth. He glanced around, no one in sight. The snow fell thicker, smothering the park in ghostly silence. He called emergency services, voice shaking, urging them to hurry. The operator's calm tone couldn't hide the urgency in her words. "Keep her awake, sir. Don't let her sleep." He nodded even though she couldn't see him, whispering to the girl, "Tell me your name." "What's your name, sweetheart?" Her eyes fluttered open, brown like melted chocolate, fragile yet deep. "Lila," she whispered faintly, a ghost of a smile forming. "That's a beautiful name," he said softly. "Lila, stay with me. You're safe now." She tried to respond, but her voice faltered, her breathing uneven. He pulled her closer, feeling the slow rhythm of her heartbeat against his chest. "You're gonna be okay, I promise." For a man who didn't believe in promises anymore, the words felt foreign yet sacred. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance, weaving through the snowstorm. Relief flickered across his features, but it couldn't wash away the chill creeping into his heart. "Who were you waiting for, Lila?" he asked gently. Her eyes blinked slowly, gazing at him as if seeing someone far away. "Mommy said," she whispered, her voice so thin it barely existed, "you'd never come back." The words hit him like a thunderclap. He blinked, confused, his heart lurching. "What did you say?" Her lips trembled. "Mommy said you'd never come back." "Ethan." His entire body went still. His name, on the lips of a dying child he'd never met. The sirens grew louder, but all he could hear was that fragile voice echoing through the storm. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he stared at her pale face. The ambulance lights flashed red across the snow, but his world froze on one haunting question. How did this little girl know his name? Under the sterile glow of white hospital lights, the world seemed to shrink around Ethan Cole. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor cut through the silence, like a fragile thread keeping life tethered to the girl lying motionless behind the glass partition. His tailored suit was damp from melted snow, the once crisp fabric clinging to him as if reminding him of how close death had brushed his arms tonight. He'd never felt this powerless before. Not in boardrooms, not in negotiations, not even when his empire had been on the verge of collapse. Power meant nothing when a child's life hung in the balance. He paced the corridor restlessly, the smell of antiseptic and distant cries from other rooms clawing at his nerves. Nurses moved in and out of the room where the girl, Lila, lay surrounded by machines, her small chest rising and falling with the effort of someone fighting a storm inside her lungs. The doctors' voices blended into a blur of medical jargon, words that made Ethan's throat tighten even though he barely understood them. Hypothermia, severe exhaustion, possible infection. He pressed his palms against the cold wall, staring at his reflection in the glass, his eyes red, his usually composed face drawn with fear. When the nurse finally stepped out, her voice was calm but heavy. "She's stable for now," she said, "but we need details. Family name, contact, anything?" Ethan blinked, realizing he had nothing. No ID, no documents, no clue who she was, only that she somehow knew his name. "She was alone in the park," he murmured, the words catching in his throat. No one else was around. The nurse nodded sympathetically, jotting something down. "We'll have to list her as unknown minor until someone comes forward." The term felt wrong, unknown. The little girl who had whispered his name couldn't be unknown to him. There had to be a connection, some invisible thread pulling at his past. He sat down beside her bed, his heart pounding in sync with the slow blip of the monitor. Her small hand rested on the blanket, fingers curled slightly, her skin pale but warm again. Ethan found himself tracing the edge of the hospital sheet, eyes drawn to the faint shimmer of silver on her wrist. A bracelet, thin, delicate, and old, like something handmade. He leaned closer, brushing off a bit of dust to read the engraved letters. E.C. He froze, his initials. His breath hitched, and for a long moment he couldn't move. He stared at the letters as if they held a secret meant for him alone. Ethan Cole, the same initials he used to sign contracts, to stamp authority on billion-dollar deals, now gleamed softly on a fragile wrist. Coincidence? His rational mind whispered yes, but his heart, that stubborn traitor, whispered no. He swallowed hard, memories flickering at the edges of his mind. His college years, that summer in Chicago, the woman with the warm laugh and amber eyes who had called him too driven for love. Clara. The name felt distant, like a melody half remembered. He rubbed his forehead, trying to shake off the thought. No, this couldn't be tied to her. It was impossible. Yet the girl's soft features, the curve of her nose, the faint dimple when she breathed, something about her felt hauntingly familiar. He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion pressing down on him, but sleep refused too. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the streetlight, the snow, and the fragile voice saying his name. The door creaked softly. A nurse entered quietly, carrying a clipboard. "Sir," she said gently, "we checked the child's pockets for identification." There wasn't much, but her voice trailed off as she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. "We found this." Ethan took it from her, the paper damp and wrinkled from melted snow. As he unfolded it carefully, his fingers trembled. The image was faint but recognizable. A photograph, years old, its edges yellowed and soft. His breath caught in his throat. There he was, younger, smiling in a way he hadn't in years, his arm around a woman whose face he'd never been able to forget. Clara, the woman who had once been his everything, the one who had walked away. The nurse's voice broke through his daze. "Is that you, sir?" Ethan stared at the picture, his heart hammering. "Yes," he whispered. "It's me and her." The nurse tilted her head. Was she family? He couldn't answer. His mind spun, the weight of 1,000 unspoken possibilities crashing over him. Why did this photo end up with the girl? Why did she know his name? Why did she wear his initials? A tremor passed through his hands as he clutched the picture tighter, his pulse roaring in his ears. The past he had buried under skyscrapers, and success was clawing its way back through a child's faint breath. He turned to look at Lila again, her small chest rising in fragile defiance against the machines that fought to keep her alive. Somewhere deep inside him, something whispered that fate wasn't finished with him yet. The nurse looked uneasy, her gaze flicking to the doorway before lowering her voice. "Sir, there's something else. On the back of that photo, there's handwriting. It says, 'For Ethan, she deserves to know the truth.'" The handwriting on the back of the photo burned in Ethan's mind like a confession, written by fate itself. For Ethan, she deserves to know the truth. He sat frozen in the hospital chair, the photograph trembling between his fingers, the hum of the machines behind him growing distant. His reflection in the window looked like that of a stranger, a man stripped of the armor that money, power, and pride had built. The name Clara echoed in his skull, pulling him back through years he had buried under contracts, luxury, and regret. He could still see her standing in that small Chicago apartment, the warmth of sunlight in her hair, her laugh soft and contagious. Her eyes, those same hazel eyes that now belonged to the unconscious child, filled with both love and disappointment. The memory of their last night together struck like lightning. Clara had stood by the door, her hands shaking as she clutched a suitcase. "You don't listen, Ethan," she had said, her voice trembling but strong. "You love success more than people. I can't raise a child with someone who doesn't believe in family." And he, proud, blinded by ambition, had thrown the cruelest words he could find. "Then leave, Clara. I don't need distractions." He had watched her walk away, thinking she would return as she always did. But she never did. Now, years later, a little girl who looked like her lay breathing softly on a hospital bed, wearing his initials, carrying his photograph, and calling his name through the snow. The thought made his stomach turn. He gripped his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Marcus," he said when a rough voice answered. "I need you to find someone." His longtime private investigator, the man who had once unearthed financial frauds and corporate betrayals, now heard a crack in Ethan's voice he had never heard before. "The name's Clara Evans," Ethan said. "I need everything. Where she lives, who she's with, what happened to her after she left me." Marcus hesitated. "After all these years, sir? You sure?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Just do it." The next few hours dragged like eternity. The night deepened, snow falling thicker against the tall glass windows of the hospital. Ethan refused to leave Lila's side. He brushed strands of hair from her forehead, noticing how her expression softened in sleep, as if she were dreaming of something peaceful. Every small breath she took anchored him deeper into a guilt he could no longer outrun. His mind replayed old scenes. Clara painting in their old apartment, laughing at his terrible jokes, pressing her palm against his chest and saying, "One day, I hope your heart learns to rest." He had thought love was weakness, that vulnerability was a luxury he couldn't afford. And now the universe had handed him the bill for that arrogance. Midnight crept closer, and the hospital halls emptied until only the distant whir of machines and the soft tick of a wall clock kept him company. His phone buzzed sharply, shattering the silence. Marcus. Ethan's pulse raced as he answered. "Tell me you found her," he demanded, his voice low but trembling. There was a pause, a heavy breath on the other end. "Ethan," Marcus began, his tone cautious, almost regretful. "I went through every record, every lead. Clara Evans, there's no recent activity, no address, no phone. But there was a report." Ethan's chest tightened. "A report? A car accident," Marcus continued slowly. "3 years ago. The file says she didn't survive." Ethan's hand went cold. The phone nearly slipped from his fingers. "No," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Marcus sighed. "I double-checked, Ethan. Same name, same photo from her ID." "I'm sorry." Ethan stood motionless, staring through the glass at the little girl sleeping peacefully under the pale hospital light. His mind refused to accept it. Clara, gone. The woman who had once been his heartbeat, the only one who saw the man beneath the armor, was gone. And yet somehow a piece of her was lying right before him, breathing softly, alive. His throat constricted as emotion broke through years of restraint. He pressed his palm against the glass, whispering to no one, "Clara, what did you leave behind?" The hospital clock struck midnight, its echo crawling down the empty corridor like a funeral bell. Outside, the snowstorm howled through the city, scattering white ghosts across the streets. But inside that room, one truth began to form, a truth Ethan wasn't ready to face. The door creaked open, and Marcus's voice trembled through the receiver. "Sir, there's one more thing." The police report mentioned a child, unidentified, found near the crash site, a little girl about 4 years old, rhythm of snow and sterile hospital lights. Ethan remained at Lila's side, sleeping in the chair by her bed, his expensive coat wrinkled, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Each rise and fall of her fragile chest felt like the ticking of a clock he could not control. The doctors called her a miracle, the child who survived frostbite and fever. But Ethan knew it wasn't just medicine that kept her alive. It was her will, that small spark of hope she carried even in unconsciousness. When she finally stirred, a faint sound escaped her lips, a whisper softer than falling snow. Her lashes fluttered, and she blinked up at the bright white ceiling before her gaze shifted toward him. For a second, confusion danced across her delicate face, then recognition, as if her soul had been waiting to see him all along. Her tiny fingers moved weakly toward him, trembling, and when she spoke, her voice cracked through the stillness like an echo from another life. "You came back," she breathed, and Ethan froze. Her tone wasn't one of surprise, but of fulfillment, as though she had expected him, as though his presence was promised to her by someone long gone. "Daddy said you'd forget," she continued softly. "But Mommy said you'd remember me on Christmas." The world seemed to stop spinning. The soft hum of the machines faded behind the roar of Ethan's heartbeat in his ears. Her words sliced through the barriers he had built over years of regret and pride. He swallowed hard, trying to find his voice, but the lump in his throat wouldn't let sound escape. His eyes burned, and for the first time in years, Ethan Cole, the billionaire who had built an empire out of cold logic, felt utterly powerless. He wanted to correct her, to tell her she was mistaken, but something deep inside whispered not to. Maybe it was the flicker of recognition in her hazel eyes, the same warmth he once drowned in when Clara looked at him. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was destiny. Whatever it was, he found himself leaning forward, brushing her hair from her forehead with a trembling hand, forcing a smile that barely held together. "Rest now, Lila," he said quietly, his voice shaking. "You're safe." She smiled faintly, and that tiny, trusting curve of her lips shattered something inside him. When the hospital finally discharged her, the snow outside had grown thicker, wrapping the city in a blanket of white silence. Ethan didn't send his chauffeur. He went himself. He wrapped her in a warm red coat and lifted her gently into his car. For the first time, his sleek black limousine didn't feel like a cage. It felt like sanctuary. As they drove through the glowing streets of New York, festive lights flickered in shop windows, laughter echoed from families hurrying home, and carols floated through the night air. Leela pressed her nose to the glass, eyes wide with wonder. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Mommy used to tell me Christmas lights are stars that came down to visit lonely people." Ethan looked at her, words failing him. He had spent countless Christmases in silence, his mansion dark and cold, his heart barricaded by success and sorrow. But tonight, something inside him stirred. An ache mixed with longing, a quiet wish for redemption. When they reached his estate, the massive iron gates opened slowly, revealing a world of glittering white and gold. The staff, who hadn't seen their boss, smile in years, stood speechless as Ethan carried the small girl into the grand hall. "Decorate everything," he ordered softly, setting her down near the enormous Christmas tree that stood waiting in the corner. "I want lights, music, warmth, all of it." And for once, his voice didn't sound commanding. It sounded human. The mansion transformed overnight. Golden ribbons danced across staircases, candles flickered in glass lanterns, and the scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air. Lila watched, her eyes glowing brighter than any ornament. She laughed when snowflakes from her boots melted on the marble floor, and that laughter, light, pure, and innocent, echoed through every empty corridor like a blessing. Later that evening, Ethan found himself sitting beside her by the fire. She was bundled in a soft white blanket, a mug of hot chocolate between her tiny hands. "Do you live here alone?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yes," he replied, staring into the flames. "Why?" Her question lingered in the air, simple yet sharp. Ethan hesitated, then sighed. "Because sometimes people leave, and the silence is easier than remembering them." She nodded slowly, as though she understood pain far beyond her years. She placed her small hand over his. "Mommy said silence can't heal hearts," she whispered. Her words hit him harder than any truth he had faced in boardrooms or battles. He turned away, afraid she would see the tears forming in his eyes. As the night deepened, the mansion glowed like a cathedral of light. Lila helped hang ornaments, carefully placing each one as though it carried a story. She made him promise to put the star on top together. "Mommy said the last star is always for hope," she told him. When he lifted her high on his shoulders to place it, her laughter echoed like a melody he'd been missing his entire life. For the first time in years, the walls of his home felt alive again. When bedtime came, Lila refused to sleep in the guest room. "Can I stay near the tree?" she asked. "Mommy said angels visit children who wait by the lights." Ethan nodded, his throat too tight to argue. He laid a blanket beneath the tree, tucked her in, and watched her eyelids flutter as she drifted into dreams. He stood there for a long time, his reflection mirrored in the glittering ornaments. A man who had everything, yet nothing. As he turned to leave, her soft voice broke through the hush of midnight. "Mommy told me something else, too." He paused, glancing back. Her eyes were half closed, her words slurred with sleep. "She said, 'You're the richest man.'" A faint smile touched her lips. "But you have the poorest heart." Ethan froze. The fire crackled behind him, throwing his shadow across the floor, long and broken. He wanted to speak, to deny it, but his lips wouldn't move. He realized she wasn't accusing him. She was reminding him of something he'd lost long ago. The ability to love freely, without fear or pride. He turned away, his chest heavy, the sound of her breathing soft and steady behind him, mingling with the whisper of snow against the windows. Outside, the night carried her words through the wind, echoing into the darkness like a prophecy. As the clock struck midnight, the power flickered, the Christmas lights dimmed, and from the hallway came a soft creak, followed by a voice that sent chills down Ethan's spine. "Greater than Ethan, you kept your promise." Morning crept gently into the mansion. spilling soft gold light across the frost-glazed windows. For the first time in years, laughter echoed in the halls that had once been silent as a tomb. Ethan Cole, the man whose name commanded respect in boardrooms and fear in markets, stood in the kitchen wearing an apron that clearly didn't belong to him. The once flawless businessman fumbled awkwardly with a frying pan, flipping pancakes that landed on the floor more often than on the plate. Lila sat on the counter, her small legs swinging, her giggles bright as bells. "You're burning them again," she laughed, covering her nose as smoke rose. "I'm testing gravity," he said dryly, pretending seriousness. "It still works." Her laughter broke through his deadpan expression, and for the first time in years, Ethan found himself laughing too. Real, unfiltered laughter that made his chest ache in a way that wasn't pain, but something close to healing. It startled him. The sound of it felt foreign, almost sacred. He served her a plate of half-burnt pancakes with a dramatic bow. "Bon appetit, princess," he said. She bit one and wrinkled her nose. "You need practice." "I'm aware," he chuckled, sitting beside her, letting the warmth of her presence fill the cold corners of his heart. As days passed, their lives began to intertwine like threads of two broken stories mending each other. Ethan started leaving the office early, claiming urgent personal affairs, a phrase that confused his assistants. He found himself reading bedtime stories at night, his deep voice softening as Lila drifted to sleep with her tiny hand clutching his finger. Once she woke from a nightmare, crying for her mother, and he stayed by her side until dawn, holding her close as snowflakes whispered against the window. In those quiet hours, the truth gnawed at him. Clara's memory, her last words, the storm that tore them apart. He remembered her telling him he wasn't ready for a family and how he had let pride answer for him. Now he saw that pride as a wall that had cost him everything. Lila had a way of bringing light into darkness. She painted pictures with crayons and taped them to his office walls. She sang little songs about angels and chocolate cookies while he worked late, her voice filling the empty mansion with something fragile and alive. Once she asked him what lonely meant. Ethan hesitated, then said, "It's when you forget how to be loved." She tilted her head, thinking hard, then smiled. "Then you're not lonely anymore." He almost cried. Her innocence disarmed him. Her trust terrified him. Because deep down, he knew he didn't deserve it. Not yet. But the question haunted him like a shadow. Why did she call him daddy that night? Was it just a child's fantasy, or something real, something that fate had hidden from him? He searched through every file, every memory of Clara, trying to piece together the truth. He found her old letters, now yellowed and torn, the ink smeared by time. None mentioned a child. He stared at their last photo together, her smile radiant, his arm around her waist, and remembered the day they had promised forever. That forever had ended with silence and a slammed door. And now, years later, the universe had placed this small girl in his arms like a second chance wrapped in mystery. One morning, as Lila was drawing at the dining table, Ethan's assistant Daniel arrived for a briefing. He paused mid-sentence when his gaze fell on the girl. "She's adorable," Daniel said, smiling politely. But then his smile faded as he studied her face more closely. The dimples, the slightly crooked grin, the same spark of mischief that Ethan carried in his younger days. "Sir, she looks just like you," he said quietly. Ethan froze, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to himself. "Coincidence," he murmured. "Maybe," Daniel replied, though his expression said otherwise. That night, as the mansion slept, Ethan sat alone in his study. Papers lay scattered before him, but his eyes were fixed on a single envelope. The DNA test request form. His hand trembled as he signed it. He didn't want to know, yet he had to. Because if Lila was his daughter, he had abandoned not only Clara, but also the innocent soul now sleeping down the hall. The thought tore him apart. He mailed the sample in silence, his reflection in the window staring back. A man who had everything but peace. The next few days stretched endlessly. Lila filled them with drawings and laughter, asking him to help her build a snowman in the garden. They bundled up in coats and scarves, their cheeks pink from the cold. She named the snowman Mr. Cole Jr. and insisted he looked just like Ethan. He smiled, pretending not to notice how his chest tightened at the sound of his own name paired with hers. At night, when she hugged him goodnight, whispering, "Love you, Mr. Ethan," he felt something stir inside him that was both joy and guilt, a dangerous mixture that made him question every choice he'd ever made. Days later, his phone rang just as the first snow of the evening began to fall. The number flashing on the screen was unfamiliar, but carried a weight he recognized instantly. The lab. His breath caught as he answered. "Mr. Cole," said the voice on the line, calm and professional. "Your requested report is ready for collection." Ethan's pulse quickened. He didn't tell anyone. He drove alone to the private facility, the city lights blurring through his windshield. Snowflakes landed on the glass like tiny ghosts. When he arrived, the receptionist handed him a sealed envelope, her polite smile oblivious to the storm brewing inside him. He sat in his car for a long time, staring at it, afraid of what it might say. Finally, with trembling fingers, he broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, neat and clinical, the truth printed in black and white. His vision blurred as he read the words that changed everything. Paternity confirmed. 99.9% match. His breath hitched, his world tilting. The air in the car felt thinner, the snow outside falling faster, muffling the sound of his ragged breathing. Clara hadn't lied. She hadn't been cruel. She had been protecting their daughter. His daughter. And he, blinded by pride and pain, had walked away from both. Ethan's hands trembled as he clutched the paper. When suddenly his phone buzzed again. It was his head of security, voice urgent and panicked. "Sir, Lila's gone. She's not in her room." The night was suffocatingly silent, broken only by the slow tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Ethan's heart pounded against his ribs as he ran through the mansion, calling Lila's name, his voice echoing through the marble corridors. Panic gnawed at him like fire. Every door he opened revealed emptiness. Her small shoes missing, her blanket tossed aside. It felt as though the air had been sucked out of his lungs. Just when despair began to strangle him, a faint cry echoed from the far end of the hall. The nursery. He burst through the door and froze. There she was, sitting on the window seat, wrapped in her little blanket, staring out at the falling snow. Relief crashed over him, so hard his knees nearly gave way. He rushed to her, his arms encircling her trembling frame. "Lila! Why did you leave your room?" he gasped, his voice breaking. She blinked up at him, her eyes heavy with sleep. "I wanted to see the snow angels," she whispered softly. He pressed his forehead against hers, exhaling shakily. "You scared me," he murmured. "You really scared me." But the adrenaline faded, replaced by a deeper ache. Guilt, raw and sharp. He carried her back to her bed and sat beside her as she curled up beneath the covers. The firelight flickered across her innocent face, and for a long moment, Ethan just watched her breathe. The truth he now held, that she was his daughter, felt both like salvation and punishment. His mind replayed the memory he had buried for years. Clara standing in their old apartment, her voice trembling as she told him she was pregnant. He had been cold, distant, too obsessed with his growing empire to listen. He'd accused her of lying, of trying to trap him. She'd cried, begged him to believe her, but his pride was louder than her tears. That day he'd slammed the door and walked out, choosing ambition over love. And now fate had dragged him back to that moment. Only this time, it was too late to undo the damage. He dropped to his knees beside the bed, his hands shaking as he reached for hers. The little girl stirred, her fingers curling instinctively around his. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words trembling in the still air. "I'm sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. I'm sorry I failed you both." His voice broke, and a tear fell onto her tiny hand. Lila's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment he thought she hadn't heard him. Then she smiled, that small, tender smile that carried more grace than he deserved. "You didn't fail, Daddy," she murmured sleepily. "You came back." Those 3 words struck him harder than any accusation. He had spent years believing he was incapable of redemption, that the world had hardened him beyond repair. Yet here she was, his daughter, offering forgiveness so pure it shattered his defenses. He brushed her hair back, his chest tightening with both love and shame. "I'll never leave you again," he vowed, his voice thick. She nodded faintly, drifting into sleep, her tiny breaths syncing with the rhythm of his heart. For a long time he sat there in silence, his hand still clasping hers, afraid that if he let go, she might vanish again. The snow outside deepened, swirling against the windows like a soft white storm, muffling the city beyond. Downstairs, the fireplace crackled, its warmth spilling across the cold floor. Ethan descended quietly, his mind a storm of memory and regret. He poured himself a glass of water, but couldn't bring himself to drink. The DNA report lay open on the table beside him, stark proof of a truth he both longed for and dreaded. He traced Clara's name with a trembling finger, his throat tight with emotion. "Clara," he whispered into the empty room. "You were right. You tried to tell me, and I didn't listen." He clenched the paper in his fist, his jaw trembling as tears blurred his vision. "I thought I was protecting myself," he said, his voice raw. "But all I did was destroy everything that mattered." He looked toward the staircase where Lila slept peacefully above and made a silent promise to the woman he had wronged. "I'll protect her. With everything I have left, I'll protect her." He spent the rest of the night sitting by the window, watching the snow fall thicker and heavier. It blanketed the city in a quiet, fragile peace. For a moment, he almost believed the world could start over, that forgiveness might be real. But somewhere deep inside, unease stirred. A whisper that something was coming, something dark that refused to be buried under snow. A flicker of movement caught his eye, a shadow near the gates. He stood slowly, frowning. The silhouette lingered for a moment, then disappeared into the night. Probably a guard, he told himself, but the air felt colder, sharper, as if danger itself had exhaled against the glass. Upstairs, Lila shifted in her sleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her lips moved faintly, whispering something he couldn't hear. Ethan turned off the light and headed toward the staircase, exhaustion weighing him down. Just as he placed his foot on the first step, the phone on the counter buzzed. He picked it up, expecting another corporate message. But what came through the line made his blood run cold. A distorted voice, low and deliberate, whispered, "You found her." His stomach twisted. "Who is this?" he demanded, his voice rising. The line crackled with static before the voice spoke again. "Time to finish what Clara started." Then the call disconnected. Ethan's hand tightened around the phone, his reflection staring back from the darkened window. Pale, haunted, and trembling. Outside, hidden beyond the snow and shadows, a man in a dark coat lowered his phone, his breath fogging the glass. His eyes fixed on the mansion's glowing windows as he whispered, "He has no idea she isn't the only secret Clara left behind." The mansion stood wrapped in silent snow, its golden lights flickering like trembling hearts against the darkness, unaware that outside, a storm far colder than winter had begun to form. Ethan sat by the crackling fireplace with Lila curled in his arms, her tiny head resting against his chest as the sound of her breathing mingled with the whisper of flames. For the first time in years, the house felt alive, filled with laughter, warmth, and the delicate music of hope. But peace has a fragile heartbeat. It breaks easily. The next morning, Ethan's world shifted when a letter arrived in an unmarked envelope, its paper rough and damp, edges slightly burned as though it had traveled through fire. He tore it open absent-mindedly, expecting another business proposal or Christmas greeting, but froze as he read the uneven, furious handwriting that bled across the page. "You don't deserve her. I'll take her where she belongs." The words hit him like bullets, echoing in his skull, slicing through every tender thought he'd tried to build. His chest tightened. His fingers trembled as the name sign at the bottom came into focus. Damon Reeves. Clara's brother. The man who had once shaken his hand at the funeral with silent disgust. Ethan could still remember his eyes that day, cold, accusing, like shards of glass reflecting grief and rage. Now those same eyes were watching again, somewhere in the shadows. Ethan felt his throat dry up, his mind racing through every possibility. He had enemies in business, sure, but this was personal. It wasn't about money. It was about punishment, about the past that refused to stay buried. He sat frozen, staring at the letter until Lila's laughter drifted from the next room, breaking his trance. He quickly folded the note and slipped it into his pocket before she could see the fear on his face. She came skipping in, wearing her oversized reindeer sweater, holding 2 mugs of hot cocoa she'd made with too much sugar and no milk. Her eyes shone like Clara's, bright, mischievous, full of a light he didn't deserve to see. Ethan forced a smile, pretending everything was fine. But deep inside, his chest ached with dread. He knew Damon. The man was unpredictable, broken by grief, incapable of anything. Ethan began making calls, tightening security, installing cameras, doubling guards, pretending it was all for Christmas decorations. Lila never suspected a thing. She just danced around the living room, singing off-key Christmas songs, her voice the only sound that made his heart beat softly again. Yet every time she called him Daddy, guilt twisted inside him. He'd once been too proud to admit he could love, too proud to fight for Clara when she needed him most. Now he was afraid the universe would punish him by taking Lila away, the only reminder of the love he had destroyed. Days blurred together under the weight of paranoia. Ethan's smile became forced, his eyes constantly darting to the windows, the gates, the shadows behind every moving car. His assistant noticed his behavior, but he dismissed it with sharp words and a shaky grin. At night, he'd check Lila's room multiple times, standing at her doorway, watching her sleep beneath a blanket of soft fairy lights, whispering prayers he hadn't said since childhood. Sometimes he thought he saw a figure across the yard, dark, still, watching, but when he blinked, it was gone. He told himself it was imagination, exhaustion, or maybe his guilt wearing a face. But the fear remained, tightening around his lungs like invisible hands. He began locking every door himself, walking the halls in silence while the snowstorm outside sang a ghostly lullaby. Still, the feeling wouldn't leave, that sense that someone was near, waiting. On Christmas Eve, the mansion glowed brighter than ever. Ethan wanted to make it the best Christmas of Lila's life, maybe to make up for all the ones he'd stolen from her without knowing. The tree sparkled with silver ribbons and crystal ornaments that reflected her smile like 1,000 tiny mirrors. She had made a star from cardboard and glitter and insisted they place it together on top. When Ethan lifted her onto his shoulders, she laughed so loud it echoed through the halls, a sound so pure it could melt frost. For a few precious hours, he let himself believe everything was fine. That Damon's letter was an empty threat. He tucked it away in his desk, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and watched his daughter dance in circles with her teddy bear. The air smelled of pine and cinnamon, the warmth of a family he thought he'd never have. Later that night, after bedtime stories and whispered prayers, Ethan kissed Lila's forehead and whispered, "You're safe now, Angel. No one will ever hurt you." He stayed in her room longer than usual, memorizing the curve of her smile as she drifted off, the way her hand clutched his sleeve even in sleep. Outside, snowflakes fell silently, blanketing the earth in innocence he wished he could believe in again. He left the room reluctantly, closing the door with a soft click, unaware that shadows were already moving beyond the glass. Downstairs, the fire burned low, painting the walls in trembling orange light. Ethan poured another drink, trying to drown the whisper of Damon's voice in his head. "You don't deserve her." He told himself he'd call the police in the morning, show them the letter, hire even more protection. But guilt made him hesitate. Maybe Damon was right. Maybe he didn't deserve to keep her. Maybe this was karma finally collecting its debt. The thought made him shiver. He stood by the window watching the snow, unaware that at that very moment, a faint creak echoed upstairs. The sound of a window sliding open. A gust of cold wind slipped through the halls, brushing the Christmas stockings and making them sway. Ethan frowned, half turning, thinking he'd imagined it. But then he heard something else. A muffled sound, like footsteps too light to be his own. He rushed up the stairs, heart pounding. The corridor was dim, only lit by the warm glow of the night lamp near Lila's door. He knocked softly, whispering her name. No answer. The silence screamed louder than any noise. Panic clawed at his throat as he pushed the door open. The bed was empty, the blanket thrown aside. The window stood wide open, snowflakes dancing inside like mocking confetti. His heart stopped. For a second, the world tilted. The Christmas lights blurred. He ran to the window, his breath fogging the air, and looked down. Tiny footprints, small, delicate, trailed off into the white darkness. His knees gave out as the letter's words burned back into his mind. The cold wind howled through the empty room as Ethan stared into the snow, whispering her name. Far beyond the mansion gates, a black car disappeared into the storm. Inside, a child's soft voice trembled. "Uncle Damon, where are we going?" The night exploded with white silence as the storm howled across the sleeping city, the kind of storm that could swallow a man whole and erase his footprints before the next heartbeat. Ethan burst out of the mansion doors, coat flying behind him, snow slicing against his face like shards of glass. The wind carried his voice away every time he screamed her name. "Lila! Lila!" As if the world itself refused to answer him. His breath came in violent gasps, each one a knife in his lungs, but he didn't stop. The Christmas lights that once made the mansion glow with warmth now flickered weakly in the distance, a dying heartbeat fading into the dark. His shoes sank deep into the snow, his legs heavy, his soul heavier. He reached the garden gate, his eyes scanning the horizon, praying she'd appear with that innocent smile and soft voice calling him Daddy. But the only sound was the storm's cruel laughter. Then a flash of paper caught his eye near the lamppost, something fluttering wildly in the cold wind. He stumbled forward, heart pounding, and ripped the note from the post. The ink was smeared by melting snow, but the words cut deeper than ice. "You had one chance to love Clara. You won't have one for Lila." For a moment, the world stopped spinning. The snow seemed to fall slower, heavier, as Ethan stared at the message that felt like a death sentence. His knees gave out. He collapsed into the snow, his chest heaving, his vision blurred by tears and exhaustion. "No," he whispered, his voice raw. "Not again. I can't lose her." The memories came rushing back. Clara's trembling hands, her tear-streaked face the day she told him she was pregnant. His prideful silence, his refusal to believe her, and the moment she walked out of his life carrying his child. Now the universe was forcing him to relive that pain in a crueler form. His heart hammered violently in his chest as he pushed himself up, the note still crumpled in his fist. He glanced at the snow-covered road. Faint tire tracks veering away from the mansion gates, leading into the forest road. Without thinking, he ran. His phone was dead, his body numb, but instinct and love became his compass. The wind roared like a beast in his ears. Tree branches bent and snapped under the fury of the storm, and each gust seemed to whisper Clara's voice. "Find her, Ethan. Please, find our baby." The headlights of his car struggled against the blizzard as he drove through the endless white. His hands trembled around the steering wheel, eyes wide with fear. Every minute felt like a stolen moment, every second like a countdown to tragedy. The radio crackled with static. He turned it off. Silence. Only the sound of his heart beating in sync with the storm. Suddenly, a shadow flashed across the road. Damon's car, weaving dangerously through the snow, its taillights glowing like two blood-red eyes. Ethan's chest tightened. He pressed the accelerator, tires spinning on the ice. "Hold on, Lila," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Daddy's coming." He could barely see more than a few feet ahead, but he followed the fading tire tracks, guided by the desperate pulse of his love. The wind screamed around him as he reached the old bridge, the same one where Clara once confessed her love to him years ago, under a gentler snowfall, when life still felt like it could last forever. Now it was a battlefield between life and death. Through the swirling snow, his headlights caught sight of Damon's black car sliding sideways, tires screeching, spinning uncontrollably toward the icy edge. Ethan's breath hitched as he saw a tiny face in the back seat, pale, terrified, pressing against the glass. Lila, his daughter. His heart shattered. He slammed the brakes, the car skidding sideways as he jumped out into the storm, running toward the chaos, his voice breaking the night like thunder. "Lila!" The bridge groaned under the weight of Damon's car as it teetered on the edge. Lila's terrified eyes locked with Ethan's, her hand pressed against the glass. Just before the car slipped, plunging into the freezing darkness below. The world became a blur of chaos and blinding white as Ethan threw himself into the freezing night, the roar of the river below echoing like a monster's growl. The car teetered on the edge of the bridge, metal shrieking against metal, headlights flickering in the storm like dying stars. Lila's terrified scream sliced through the wind, and that single sound shattered every wall he had ever built around his heart. He didn't think, he moved. Snow and ice crunched beneath his boots as he sprinted toward the edge, his pulse pounding louder than the storm itself. The bridge swayed, a deadly promise of collapse, but he didn't care. He jumped, grabbing the car door just as the vehicle lurched forward. The impact jarred his shoulder, pain exploding through his body, but he clung tighter. The window was jammed. The glass cracked under his fist as he slammed it again and again until it shattered, spraying shards that cut his knuckles. Through the broken window, he saw Lila, tiny, trembling, eyes wide with fear and trust all at once. "Daddy!" she cried, her small hands reaching for him. "Hold on!" he gasped, his breath fogging the air as he stretched his arm inside, fingers brushing hers. The car slid another inch toward the abyss. The sound of twisting steel filled the air as the bridge cables groaned. One last pull, and he yanked her out, wrapping his coat around her as they both tumbled backward into the snow. The car gave one final screech before gravity claimed it, plunging into the black river below with a deafening splash that swallowed the night. For a heartbeat, there was silence, then sirens in the distance, echoing faintly through the storm. Ethan knelt in the snow, clutching Lila against his chest, feeling the fragile rhythm of her heartbeat against his. Her small hand gripped his shirt, and through chattering teeth she whispered, "You came for me." His voice broke as he answered, "Always, baby girl." Always. The flashing red and blue lights painted the snow in ghostly colors as rescuers swarmed the bridge. Two firefighters pulled Damon from the water, soaked, bruised, half-conscious. Ethan watched in silence, torn between fury and compassion. Damon's lips were blue, his breath shallow, yet his eyes flickered open long enough to meet Ethan's gaze. I just wanted her safe," Damon whispered, each word trembling with pain and guilt. Clara made me promise to find her father if anything happened." The storm quieted for the first time that night, as if even the heavens paused to listen. Ethan's throat tightened, his eyes wet. For years, he had cursed Clara's name for walking away. Now the truth cut deeper. She never stopped protecting their child. His anger melted away, replaced by something raw and pure: forgiveness. He knelt beside Damon, pressing a hand against his shoulder. "You did what you thought was right," Ethan said softly, his voice breaking with emotion. "Thank you for keeping her alive." Damon's eyes fluttered shut, relief washing over his battered face as medics lifted him onto a stretcher. Ethan turned to the sky, snowflakes landing on his lashes, each one a reminder of the fragile miracle he almost lost. In that moment, he whispered a silent prayer, not for success, not for wealth, but for a second chance to love what he once turned away from. Hours later, the hospital smelled of antiseptic and hope. The sterile lights glowed softly as Lila lay wrapped in blankets, her cheeks pink again, her hair damp from melted snow. Ethan sat beside her, holding her hand gently, his thumb brushing over her tiny fingers, as if afraid she'd vanish if he let go. He'd faced boardrooms, enemies, and wars of pride, but never had his heart known this kind of battle. And now, looking at her peaceful face, he finally understood. Redemption wasn't found in money or power. It was in moments like this, where love was enough. The first rays of dawn crept through the window, turning the snow outside into a sea of silver. Lila stirred, her sleepy eyes fluttering open. Her voice was soft, fragile, full of childlike wonder as she looked up at him and whispered, "Mommy said you'd hold my hand on Christmas morning. Is it morning yet, Daddy?" Ethan's breath caught as he looked toward the glowing horizon, realizing it was Christmas morning. And for the first time in years, tears of gratitude rolled down his cheeks. Right before the doctor rushed in, face pale, saying, "Mr. Cole, we need to talk about your daughter's condition." The world outside the hospital was wrapped in a soft golden hush as Christmas morning finally arrived. The snow glimmering under the newborn light like a blanket of forgiveness spread across the earth. Inside, the faint beeping of machines and the whisper of winter wind through the window became a lullaby of healing and peace. Ethan sat beside Lila's bed, his once powerful hands trembling as they held her tiny ones, the warmth of her pulse grounding him more deeply than any empire he had ever built. He had spent his life conquering numbers and cities, but this morning he realized that love was the only victory that ever truly mattered. The sunlight caught the tears on his face as he whispered, his voice breaking into the stillness. "It's morning now, my angel, and I'll never let go again." Lila smiled weakly, her brown eyes glowing with that same spark Clara once had, as though her mother's soul had left behind a light to guide him home. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, feeling the gentle rise and fall of her breath as the monitors steadied. In that sacred moment, Ethan Cole, the man who had everything yet nothing, felt the weight of his soul finally lift. The ghosts of regret that had haunted him for years began to fade with each snowflake that kissed the windowpane. Later that day, he walked through the quiet streets of the city, no longer in the tailored suit of a CEO, but in a simple coat, carrying Lila in his arms as they watched the world glitter with celebration. He didn't want champagne or board meetings or applause. He wanted laughter, the smell of cookies in the oven, and the sound of his daughter humming beside him. A few weeks later, he returned to a small neighborhood on the city's edge, the place where Clara once lived, where love had bloomed and then been broken by pride. The house was worn but still carried the faint scent of her presence, like a memory that refused to fade. Ethan bought it that same day, not for himself, but for those who had no home to return to on Christmas. With Lila's help, he filled the rooms with color and warmth, repainting the walls with joy instead of sorrow. He named it Clara's Promise, a haven for homeless children, where laughter would echo where silence once lived. Each corner became a story of kindness. Each room held a second chance. Reporters tried to call it charity, but Ethan knew it was redemption, a way to turn the pain of his past into the love of his future. He no longer signed papers with the arrogance of ownership. Now each signature meant hope for another soul. Lila grew stronger each day, her laughter like bells in winter, reminding him that miracles didn't come from wealth. They came from love rediscovered. Together, they decorated a tall pine tree in the shelter's main hall, its branches heavy with colorful ornaments made by the children they had helped. Ethan's heart swelled as he watched Lila climb a small stool, her fingers carefully holding a handmade ornament, painted with childish strokes of red and gold. On it, in her uneven handwriting, were the words, "Family Forever." The sight undid him completely. His throat closed, his vision blurred, and for the first time in years, his tears were not of guilt, but of gratitude. The room smelled of pine and cinnamon, and in that sacred stillness, he felt her presence, the whisper of Clara's laughter, the echo of her forgiveness flowing through the quiet air. He walked to the window, snow still falling softly outside, blanketing the world in grace. Lila ran up and hugged him from behind, and he lifted her into his arms, resting his cheek against her soft hair. "Daddy," she murmured, "Mommy can see us, right?" He smiled through tears, nodding slowly. "Yes, sweetheart. She's right here, in every light, in every snowflake." The fire crackled behind them, children giggling in the background as the shelter glowed with warmth. Ethan tilted his head to the heavens, the golden dawn washing over his face, his heart finally at peace. "Merry Christmas, Clara," he whispered, his voice carried by the winter wind. "I found her, and she found me." Outside, the first snow of the new year began to fall, soft, endless, pure, just like the love that had finally come home.